So towards the end of Jesus' life, he talks with his disciples, and he's now preparing them for them to be without him. And he understands this is going to be such a large anguish for them. They loved Jesus. He was their Lord, their master, and they served alongside him, and they loved and cared about him. And now he's preparing them for him to be gone, and that it would be better for them. And so in John chapter 16, he starts to prepare them for his inevitability, his death, his resurrection, and ultimately his absence for them. So here's what he says. Very truly I tell you, when he's talking to his disciples, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. And you will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy. A woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come, but when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. Now, just as an aside here, only Jesus is allowed to make a birthing reference. You should never do this, okay, as a guy. I mean, Scripture says that all things were made for him and through him and by him. He knows this, but you can't go, like, my knee kind of hurts. It's kind of like giving birth to a child. Never do that, okay? Never do that. Only Jesus gets to make this reference. So, and he's absolutely right. I've witnessed a few births myself, watching my wife go through intense labor pain and then watching the joy on her face of holding our child for the first time. So the analogy that Jesus is using is that from immense pain can also come immense joy. He says, so with you, now is your time of grief, because Jesus has been telling him, I'm going to go away. And the way I go away is not going to be easy. I'm going to be illegally tried at night. You guys are going to abandon me. They're going to beat me and hit me, and they're going to torture me for a while, and they're going to hand me out 2 pieces of wood. I'm going to slowly asphyxiate to death until I eventually give up my spirit, and I'm going to be a spectacle. And it's going to be terrible, but eventually it will turn to joy. And you will rejoice, and no one will be able to take away your joy. Now, Jesus is talking about ultimate joy. Because when he comes back from the dead, there is this hope to go, oh my gosh, there is something past death. You really are who you said you are. And that part is great. But he's also preparing them for the temporary grief and anguish that they will experience. And if we continue on in our suffering is the home of Anne, here's a few things we could say about them. They will have trouble in the world, and they will have peace in him. And the reason this is so impactful is that most people don't know is that when you become a Christian, your life doesn't immediately get better. In some ways, it gets worse. You have to say no to things that you've always said yes to. You'll have friends and family members who will roll their eyes and be like, oh, you became one of those Christians, huh? We'll see how it lasts. I get that. There are things you cannot do anymore, things you won't want to do anymore. There are things you're going to have to do to become a Christian that will cause you some pain and suffering. You're going to have to admit that you sinned against God and people. You're going to have to admit that you are not a good person. You are going to have to look God metaphorically in the eye and say, I do not deserve you. And it's hard, it's painful. But ultimately, you will have peace, just like the disciples did. They will experience terrible grief at the loss of Jesus and incredible joy when he comes back. Like they are going to unimaginably, they're going to watch someone they know and love. Imagine someone you know and love and care about. Your child, your spouse. Imagine them being ruthlessly tortured and put on display and hanging, and you can't do anything about that. Imagine what that would cause in your life. You may never get over that. We don't get over people who have died peacefully. I can't imagine watching someone you know and love and care about being horrendously tortured. But he says, don't worry. That's not the end. The grief will turn to joy. They will also bring the good news of what happened to Jesus through his suffering to others, and they will suffer along the way. You know, the Old Testament or the New Testament talks about some of the deaths that the Christians would experience because they followed Jesus and they willingly suffered for him afterwards. In fact, if you look at in Acts and you look at the epistles, some of them thought it was an honor to suffer as he had. They walked into it, not just willingly, but gladly. They took a new view on what suffering was like because their Lord had suffered for them. They thought it an honor that they got to suffer for him. Now, this last one may be the one that's most telling. It may be the one that is most close to home for you. Suffering is what we fear for ourselves and those we love. And it's how Jesus proved that he loved us. We, as we discovered probably at the beginning, we don't want to suffer ourselves. We probably wouldn't choose that for someone we know and love and care about. We fear it almost beyond all things. Some of us could take death over prolonged suffering. But it's somehow the tool that God used to orchestrate and prove his love for us. He has never wasted a hurt. He has never wasted suffering. He has always brought joy to us in the long term. Maybe not in the moment, maybe not in the aftermath, but ultimately he uses suffering to bring himself glory and to bring joy to you.